So hello there guys and welcome back to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. I hope that you guys are doing well. I hope you're staying safe as always. And thank you as always to every single one of you that choose to support this channel. We are very close to reaching our next milestone. So you know what to do if you're new to this channel. Subscribe to the channel, like the video as always. And of course, if you follow us on your favourite podcasting platform, give us a nice little cheeky 5-star review. If you think that we're worthy, we'll give you a shout out on the next show as our way of saying thanks. Of course, we are now in the realms of F1 testing, and whilst we're not going to be focusing on that too much because we've got our review of F1 testing coming up after the weekend, we are going to be talking about F1 2023, but in particular, we are going to be interviewing a very special guest on the show, someone that I followed for quite a while now, and I'm really intrigued to get her views on the current landscape of F1 content creation and, of course, the future of women in motorsport, and hopefully a very big future that will be. Joining me on the show, the co-host of another podcast, that is the name, check it out, Unapologetic Women, also a host of Cut the Crypto, creator of Not Another Media Company and Sunday Fangirls, creator of several F1 Beginner's Guide, TikTok creator, Twitch creator, Instagram creator, writing newsletters, pretty much the busiest person I can think of in motorsport right now. It makes me really grateful that she has taken the time to come to talk with me on this show. We have Toni Cowan-Brown. Toni, first of all, I hope the introduction was worthy of a woman of your esteemed stature so far. How are you doing?
I'm doing incredible, and even much better after that introduction. That was a hell of an introduction. I'll take it.
Thank you.
Actually, this is a perfect little tidbit into what we want to talk about today. It's just every day I wake up thinking, I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough. There's more people doing things I want to be doing. I should have written that book. I should have posted that tweet. And so it's really nice sometimes to take a step back and look back and go, you know what, I'm actually doing okay. And hearing you lay out all of those things, it was a nice moment of just be kind to yourself, because being a content creator is rough. And I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. So that was actually a really nice reminder, because for the last couple of days, I've just been sat here going, why isn't my YouTube channel up? Why haven't I posted this? And I'm just like, you know what, I'm doing okay. So thank you for that. That had actually a very generous effect on me, listening to you lay out all of those things. So I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate the kind words. And, I think that's a very important thing. I can't say that as a content creator, I'm as busy as you are at the moment. Obviously, maybe one day that will change, but the work ethic is so important. I think sometimes it's important to sometimes take a back seat, reflect upon all that you've achieved and all that you're doing at the moment, and give yourselves a break more than anything else. Because sometimes we don't often do that enough
Isn't it a joke that if you become an entrepreneur or content creator, you've left a 9-to-5 job to basically be 24/7, which honestly feels very true.
Yeah, and it's a very brave thing to do, because I'm kind of in the middle of both of those worlds right now. So
you're doubling up.
Yeah, so but maybe one day we'll see. But for the moment, we'll make do with our small little YouTube podcast and every now and then, but we have a lovely community.
Gotta
And
start somewhere.
that's exactly. Toni, of course, I kind of sort of halfway asked you this question, asking if you were the busiest person in motorsport, but I want to kind of take this away from that to move to our icebreaker question. Now, we have a question that we ask all of our brand new guests on the show to get their insight on Formula One a little bit, and also something a little bit closer to their heart. So if I could give you any Formula One car in history, and you are the expert, you are the Sir Lewis Hamilton, the Michael Schumacher, the Leila Lombardi, if you like, at driving this car, and you could drive it anywhere around the world, whatever circuit you like, doesn't have to be an F1 circuit either. Where are you driving this car, and what are you driving?
Wow. I am so torn between. So I love the history of Formula One. And so my mind goes to, you know what? I kind of want to love to sit in the first ever version of the Formula One car back in the 50s, the one that was created, or the cars that were created by the aerodynamicists that were, used in World War II for the airplanes that then went into building cars. There's something special about what did that feeling look like? And it must have been a wonky car with wheels falling off, and we've all seen the footage. So I'm kind of torn of just give me one of the absolute first ever Formula One cars in history. and just drive it, even just keeping with the history, like driving it around the, what was the Silverstone airfield back in the day. Like, it just, what a feeling that must have been, of just like, we built a car with people who shouldn't be building cars, and we're driving it around an airfield. I don't know, there's something magical about that. But also at the same time, I look back at some of the most recent modern cars that we have in a hybrid era, and I go, God, I would love to understand that feeling of driving that car. So I don't know. That's a really great and hard question, Adam. But I think, even though I'm torn of just like, I want to understand how fast these cars go, because obviously we're all armchair experts these days, I think I'm going to go with, like, give me the first ever version of a Formula One car that was ever created. And I don't actually even know, I should know this, but who was the first, which manufacturer was the first ever to build the first ever Formula One car? But give me that.
I mean, I know someone that could probably tell me. I'd have to reach out to them on that one. But I'm sort of, when you say that, I'm thinking, well, there's a few out there. There's going to be a Ascari, Ferrari.
There's going to be a Ferrari, a Williams.
Something like that, yeah.
Well, but I'm just like, give me that. Because honestly, and I think the reason I say this is because we talk about how incredibly brave these drivers were back in the day, and we still had that sort of savior complex. They had that sort of, yeah, I'm going to go for it. Like, if I die, I die. That, again, that was, reminiscent of or the remainings of the World War II mentality. But those cars couldn't have been safe. And so I don't think any of us today can fully wrap our heads around what it meant to sit in those cars. So I think I'd love to experience that. I think I'd regret it the moment I sit in the car and go off. But
as soon as you try to turn it
back, I'm just kidding.
I don't think there's a company in the world that would insure you to do that.
No, so I don't think so.
I think this kind of answer is reserved for the hypothetical of a podcast show. But no, I love it. I love that answer, Toni. And I think when you hear answers like that, that's kind of the response I'm hoping for when I ask this question, is to regain some of that purity about the sport that can often be lost in a modern world where everyone's chasing the latest tech or the best nutrition or the best training program or the ultimate way to handle a racing line or something like that. Certain nuance like that can often be left behind when it was just literally a man or a woman driving behind basically a turbo, well,
so mechanical.
Yeah.
And you know what's interesting? I think this has highlighted for me one of the reasons, and I often talk about this, why I love this sport so much. It is that duality, or that paradox of deeply rooted in history, and it's been around for 70 years, and it's also the pinnacle of motorsports, the pinnacle of technology, the research and development that happens behind closed doors at Formula One that spills over into all of these other areas of our life. Like, there's just something magical there. But it is kind of crazy that it is this duality that's constantly happening in the sport. So yeah, what's your answer to that question, Adam?
Mine's a little bit less nostalgic than that one. It's probably the F2004 Ferrari at Monza. But that's because I'm a Ferrari fan. Anyone that listens to this show will know me to a T. Michael Schumacher fan growing up, so it is what it is. Speaking of which, of course, where did your motorsport or even F1 interests begin, Toni?
It's hard to pinpoint, but I grew up, even though I'm British, and I say British by passport, I was actually born in France and grew up in Belgium and grew up in Brussels and lived there for 20 years. So we're now away from Spa-Francorchamps. So Spa-Francorchamps holds a very special place in my heart. My dad used to take me to, it was the only sport my dad would watch. So I would get glimpses of it when he would watch it on a Sunday at home. I'd sometimes sit down and watch it, but he'd also, I'm going to use the word drag, because I don't think at the age of 6 or 7, I was skipping to Spa-Francorchamps, but he was just like, you're coming with me. It's like, okay. So there's a lot of jokes of me, falling asleep in the front row during the time when they were using, the powerful V10 engines, and people were like, how is she sleeping? This is very loud. And he was like, yeah, she's a 7-year-old. She'll sleep anywhere. So that was initially where my love for the sport started. It was a family thing. It was the only sport my dad watched. So that was definitely a bonding moment. And then I think, for like a lot of people, I just fell in and out of love with the sport. I had moments where I deeply enjoyed it, and then I had moments where I looked around and thought, this isn't tailored to me. This isn't a sport for me. I don't recognize anything here that is for me. I don't recognize anyone that looks like me. When I do show up in spaces, I'm questioned, or people like send me to somewhere else, or they think I'm the bartender and I can't possibly be here because I'm a fan. So I've definitely had those moments. And then I think I fell back in love with the sport massively when I started working in tech. And again, as I'm saying, like, all of those things came back up of realizing that the technology that was being built behind closed doors in Formula One was finding its way into different areas of society. And that got me very interested. And as someone who worked with, things like data servers and data centers, and it was interesting thinking, oh, that's interesting. Formula One collects a lot of data. Where does that data get stored? And then realizing Formula One has actually, servers that they move from one race to another. So there was all of these like tech questions that bubbled up that got me that much more interested into the sport. And so I fell back into that sport and haven't come up since forever. So that's more or less my journey.
I love that. I was just thinking when you were talking about obviously growing up in Brussels near Spa, going to the Grand Prix as a child. And obviously my earliest memories was, funny enough, going to the Belgian Grand Prix in 2001, the first race I ever went to. So I'm sort of thinking we might have gone to that Grand Prix together, just at different parts of the circuit.
Just at different parts.
I was I was sort of sat near the front row at the exit of La Source, the La Source hairpin, all the way up to
incredible.
Eau Rouge and Raidillon. And the first thing I distinctly remember was Ralf Schumacher's BMW Williams V10 roaring on a Friday morning, and it literally scared the life out of me. I could not appreciate how loud these cars really were, because the TVs don't do it justice, and
they
it was
do
amazing.
not. And it's interesting you say that. I went to an IndyCar race in Long Beach last year, 2 years ago, and they're loud too. But I had this moment of, wow, the Formula One cars of today are really not loud compared to like the Indy cars that were really loud. And then to your point, reminiscing and remembering how loud those V10s were. The only fun anecdote I have of back in the day is my dad we're still looking for this picture, but there's a picture of me as a very young child sat on the lap of Michael Schumacher's teammate at the time, but we can't remember the year. So the teammate could have either been Jos Verstappen or Martin Brundle. And I keep shouting at my dad, we got to find the picture. I need to know whose lap I was on, because it's a very different experience. But again, I was a teeny tiny child, but it is funny that we were, both my dad and I at the time were very terrible at taking pictures and memories. So we know there's a picture somewhere, but we don't know where it is. But these are fun, these little memories and these little audio moments that you remember, or these, visual moments that you remember, are pretty cool to have.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me wonder what newer F1 fans coming through, what their memories would be like. Similar, scenarios to what you've had and what I've had. And it's always fun to think about, really. And it also makes you feel a little bit old when you think back at those times, because I was thinking back to 2001. And I was like, oh, that was my 10th birthday that weekend. I thought to myself, there's so many young fans coming through. I just almost feel a little bit out of place. But
there's room for everyone.
Exactly. Talking about your content as a content creator, Toni, obviously I've gone through almost the entire repertoire of your arsenal of content. So there was a lot of research to do, and it was a fun one, I must admit. I was the extensive amount that I'd looked up, trying to sort of get to know you a little bit. And obviously, when preparing questions for any decent interview, I suppose you have to make sure you do your research. But one thing that drew my attention the most was your emphasis on what it is to be a content creator in the motorsport realms, on top of everything else that you've mentioned in politics and tech, etc. You mentioned that as a content creator, it's important to be educational as well as entertaining. I want to ask, what is the inspiration behind that for you as a content creator? And also, what are the challenges for that? Because one thing you mentioned as well on TikTok, for example, is that you get 60 seconds most of the time on shorts, and your content's quite short, short enough, I think, to get your point across. But there must be challenges to get all that info in and still be entertaining.
Yeah. Yes. I'm not the most... Okay, so there's two parts to this question. I think the reason I fell in love with TikTok is, like many people during the pandemic, it became a source of entertainment for me. It became a way to sort of escape what was happening. It became a moment during the day where you could just laugh and giggle. And I still do it today, but I would like all the best TikToks I found, I would do sort of a mashup at the end of the day and would post those on Instagram. And honestly, it brought a lot of joy, and it just brought me together with a lot of people. And it was just that moment. So I very much fell in love with that medium. And it's been interesting because I've been starting to think about, I saw a tweet the other day that got my head spinning, which was, is TikTok social media? Is TikTok the new TV? Or is TikTok a new search engine? And so that, when you think of it that way, you understand why why content on this platform has to be both entertaining and educational. And it depends how you look at it. So there are some people who will look at TikTok and go, no, TikTok's like the new Netflix, it's the new YouTube, it's the new TV. So it is about entertainment. And there's other people who look at it and going, actually more and more people, and I think it's something like 17% of Gen Z adults now use TikTok search as a search engine instead of going to Google first. And so if you know that in mind and you go, oh, well, maybe you do need to be more educational. But it's also, to answer your question of why the need for both, it's like, it's the way I know how to learn. I realized this pretty early on in my career, but also pretty early on as a student, is that I don't learn just by reading. I learn by doing research. So I love doing research. I also realized that I only realized I understood a topic if I could succinctly explain what it was. So anyone can write, honestly, 10 pages on a topic. It doesn't mean you actually understand the topic. It just means you've found all the research and you've put it all together, and there's a body of work that goes into that. But if you can answer, what is an error rake or what is sandbagging in like 10 seconds, 15 seconds, then it truly means that you've done enough research to know all of the stuff that's secondary information, all the stuff that's primary information, and all the stuff that's absolute essential information. And it's an exercise that I love doing. So I only remember things once I do the research, and I teach myself how to do it. And then I do that like written exercise, and then I put it out in the world. I'm also not the most entertaining person. I'm fun, but I am very nerdy at my core. And so I think that is like the entertainment piece is the one that I've not struggled with more, but I've had to figure out how to make content entertaining. And TikTok honestly is a perfect use case to try and bridge those two things together. But you ask any student what's the class that you most remember, what's the piece of information that you'll never forget, and how was it delivered to you? And there was probably something quirky and unique about it. But also I'm a firm believer that we should never stop learning. And so I guess this is kind of like the antidote to all of the grumpy Formula One fans who say things like, how do you not know this? A true Formula One fan would know this. And you go, no. Do you know how much information there is in Formula One? There's always something to learn. So the best feedback I ever get on a piece of content that I've worked on and put out in the world on TikTok is when I have someone that will tell me, wow, I'm a brand new fan and this is such a cool piece of information. And holy crap, I've watched this sport for 30 years and I had no idea that this was a thing. That's when I know I've bridged two worlds, and I get very excited by that.
And that sounds great. I mean, that is pretty much the obstacle I think a lot of content creators face, and not many of them actually master this or even appreciate it for what it is. I mean, I often feel, doing the content that we do, that the hardest thing to do is to make content that is, as you mentioned, educational, but also entertaining. And I think the entertaining part can always be the hard part because, if you're making content, I suppose people say, oh, don't take yourself too seriously. But I often feel that when you're trying to make shorts, as you mentioned, or TikToks explaining important information, but also make it fun, you can always be your own worst critic sometimes. Is that something that you resonate with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a double-edged sword. Being your own worst critic means that you're always leveling up. I actually have a series on this of just like why I'm dropping some of my most popular content series, truly because I look around and I go, everyone else is doing it now too, and I'm bored. I don't want to be, creator number 17 that's also doing the same, top 10 things you need to know about testing, or top 10 things. I had this whole series of every time there was a GP, like top fun facts about a specific GP in a location. And it's obvious why that's a series that has been replicated and done in various different ways, because it's very easy information to get your hands on. So I think when you're your worst critic, you sort of look at this and go, well, everyone else is doing this now. This is boring. You've done this once before. What's the next thing? What's the next thing? Series, keep iterating, keep pivoting, find something new. But it is also hard. And I think this is how we started this conversation, to sometimes just look back and go, you did okay, actually. Like, you've come a long way. The evolution is happening. The content's good. Like, there is that weird thing of just start recording. I look back and smile at the first videos I put out 3 years ago on TikTok, and I cringe and I go, God, I was so stale or so all over the place or so slow in my delivery. And it doesn't matter. I still started somewhere. And I actually think that's one of the elements that I love about content creators that is also tricky, is that watch the evolution of this creator. You go on a growth journey with them, which I absolutely love. And that was one of the things that was my approach, because it was the only approach I knew how to do, which was, I've loved this sport for many years, but I'm not an expert. I haven't followed it as closely as, maybe a lot of people do. Unlike you, I can't remember the names of cars and the dates and look at like that. My memory doesn't function like that. But I do like being asked a tough question, like, where does, one of my favorites was, someone was asking me, where did the drivers put the key once they've started the Formula One car? And I could have been an asshole and said, what do you mean a key? There's no key in the Formula One. But instead I was like, wait, no, there isn't a key in Formula One. Why isn't there a key in Formula One? Oh, because you need 20 people or so to kickstart a Formula One car. Why is that? And so those are the questions that I find really interesting. And that's unique to me. But I've always taken the approach of, I'm not here sat on a pedestal teaching you things. It's more of, let's go on a journey together, on a discovery journey, because I think that's more fun. So that's maybe where my entertainment hat sort of comes in. But there is something about being your worst critic. You just need to know when to turn it on, I think, and when to turn it off, and when to stop listening to that voice in your head that's saying you're not doing enough, you're not good enough, it's not perfect enough, don't put it out. Just switch that off and go with your gut. And what's the worst that can happen? Truly, the worst that can happen is no one sees your content or it flops. And when you think of it in the grand scheme of things, who cares? No one saw a piece of content. Redo it again. And some of the best content creators I've listened to will say, this video that now has 6 million views, I did it 7 times. And for the first 7 times, it got 10,000 views, or it got 2,000 views, or it got 5 views, or it completely flopped, or people hated it. And now it has 6 million. So I just, I knew it was a valuable piece of content, and I just kept reiterating on it.
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty cool.
No, that sounds amazing. And, for the benefit of our listeners tuning into this, I hope that you're taking notes, because I've literally brought on a master of her craft to explain this to you guys. So if any budding TikTokers or content creators out there that want to get into this niche, then by all means, take what Tony's saying as truth, really, because that is the way. That's the way to make it work. And consistency too. You literally got to be.
And I'm not that good at that. So there's an incredible guy that I discovered about 1.5 years ago, who's a videographer based in LA. He's called Jack Cook, who is phenomenal with short form content. And today or yesterday, he reached 505 daily vlogs.
Wow.
60-second vlogs. He has not missed a single day. And every day he puts out a daily vlog, super short, super succinct, with a voiceover. He's obviously phenomenal at capturing, but it helps him with his craft. And I remember sitting down with him last year and going, how do you make time for this? Because you're busy and you've got clients. And how do you make time at the end of every day to make sure? Because he has not missed a day. It has been 500 so far in 5 days, nonstop, that he has put out. So the master of consistency. And he says, you're thinking about it wrong, Toni. This is the first thing I get done. This is the most important thing I get done. And I was like, isn't that crazy that the thing that actually brings you no money, that's not for a client, that's not revenue driven, is the number one priority? And he's like, because that helps me hone in my craft, helps me build a habit. And thirdly, that is my portfolio. That is what people look at and go, yeah, we love your work. We know. And that was true, that my TikToks did create for me my portfolio, which got me into partnerships and opportunities with the likes of Aston Martin and ESPN, etc. But the consistency, I'm still struggling with a little bit, but I'm trying not to be too hard on myself. But yeah, this guy, Jack Cook, is just a master of consistency. And that message from him just resonated with me of, no, if you're serious about this should be your number one priority, not the thing at the end of the day that you go, okay, come on then, let's get this out the door.
I always think back to that Parks and Recreation episode with Nick Offerman, Ron Swanson, obviously one of my favorite characters in TV. And he says to Leslie Knope, for anyone who's watched this show, you should never half-ass 2 things, full-ass 1 thing. And that is the way to go. I absolutely hold that as a mantra, despite doing the 9 to 5 and the content creation stuff too. But one day I'll get it right. But obviously, you mentioned Aston Martin. That's a nice segue into that discussion. Obviously, you hosted a fan event at the Aston Martin launch. Looked really impressive. Sorry. Wish I should have gone. Wish I did go. Messing my words up here.
End of the day, Adam. Yes. End of the day.
End of the day. Wish I had gone to that event, but. Obviously, from what I saw, it looked amazing. How was it for you hosting the event, Toni? It looked incredible.
Thank you. They've really hats off to Aston Martin. I think it's one of the things that I really appreciated when I started working with them. I think it was back in 2021. They were coming back into the sport after 16 years being away, and they definitely were very adamant of we don't want to just be seen as the James Bond car 007. We know there's a whole new fan base here, and so we've got to connect with that fan base straight away. And so for me, they did it in two ways: engaging with content creators like myself, Hannah, Lizzie McIntosh, and then the second way was truly putting the fan at the heart of everything they did. So we did a fan event in Miami, we did a fan event in Austin. So in Austin, got to sit down and interview Seb Vettel, and it was kind of the same with this launch. I think they're the only car launch that had two separate events, although Alpine had this a little bit as well. But this event, a lot of people criticized the Red Bull launch. We're trying to be absolutely everything to everyone. Which, there's pros and cons to that, but the massive pro is if you try and be everything to everyone, you end up being nothing to no one. And what I think Aston Martin did really well is we're going to have the launch in Silverstone, which is going to be for the VVIPs, our stakeholders, our shareholders, our partners, and for the media, where they can get really close, they can see the car, they get all of the information that the traditional media absolutely need to be able to write their reviews and all of that. And then they were just you know what, the fans want something different. And so what we've tried to deliver and give to the fans every single time that we've done these fan events is something unique. You've got to be there. It was in the moment. You were either there and experienced it or you missed it. And also, I think when this is not recorded or live streamed, whether it's the drivers or the team members that you're talking to they really go there and they have deep personal authentic connections with you and conversations. And so we were very lucky that we had the number one mechanic, Mikey, for number one mechanic for Alonso, previously to that number one mechanic for Sebastian Vettel, and prior to that Checo, and his number two mechanic, a guy called Matty. And it was one of the most thoughtful and insightful conversations I think I've had in the last couple of years. Because essentially, I was hosting the event. Part of that was just, we were going to see the car, talk about the cars. I was obviously given, here's some of the facts about the cars. This is what you need to look out for. And I had this moment of, no one wants to hear from me about the next generation of the Aston Martin car. I can read facts and numbers from a piece of paper, but we have in the room two men who essentially built the car, who were part of putting this car together piece by piece, and whose job now for the following years, strapping this driver into a rocket and send him out on track and hoping that, he delivers the best results and he is safe. And it's that's who I want to talk with. That's who the fans should, hear from. And it was just one of the most incredible conversations where they talked about building the car until 4 a.m. in the morning, and how, when we say the Aston Martin car is 95% different, what does that actually mean? And it was interesting to hear from them of nuts and bolts, the nuts and bolts we're using are different from last year. So our minds and the way we're putting the car together looks different, and we have to think about things differently. And our hands have been mechanically, used to screwing nuts and bolts together that now are not the same mechanism. So it's something that we relearn. And it's something I'd never thought about it's the start of a new school year for these guys every time when they're given a brand new car that's put together completely differently. And they go, yeah, it's a whole new lesson for the next couple of months. We're going to have to relearn all the things that we had last year that's no longer relevant for this year. And so those are the insights that get me really excited by the sport. And I think 100 fans that were there had a great time. And we got to speak with Jess Hawkins and Filipe Drogovic, who's obviously now on track testing. But it was lovely. And I don't think there are a lot of other teams who do this, where they just do unique events specifically tailored for the fans and thinking about what the fans would want, which I think is exciting.
No, it's a really good point. And, I'm glad you mentioned the contrast between a fan event like what we saw with Aston Martin. Alpine, of course, had their own event with the two show cars on display. They even rolled out Zinedine Zidane, which I think surprised a lot of people watching that event. That was a pretty cool introduction. And of course, we had the Red Bull event as well, which I think a lot of us going in knew what it was going to be with Red Bull, almost to the point where we often joke that Red Bull were just going to roll out last year's car with an updated livery, and it was a promotion for a bigger thing. But of course, it was advertised as a RB19 launch, and that got a lot of people talking. And there is concerns over what should be included in a car launch and what fans should expect from a car launch. I mean, what's your What's your take on that particular topic, if you don't mind me asking?
You've read my mind, Adam. This is great. This is going to be great prep because I have a video going out, I think, in 2 days about what I think are the key ingredients for a car launch. And I think you hit the nail on the head with the first one. It's managing expectations. It's managing expectations and figuring out what you are trying to deliver to who. So it's so obvious that what the journalists need is are we going to look at livery? Are we going to be looking at a new car? Like, give us so that we know. So being on site at the Red Bull event, what was really interesting was being able to sort of peek behind the curtains. I was there from 8 a.m. and I stayed there until 2 p.m. And I know that there is quite a fair amount of media who was there until 4 p.m. But it was also interesting to see the drivers being shuffled around and doing all of their PR interviews. So the Red Bull event was clearly like a mass media day for them. But it was, to your point, it was advertised, I think, as something a little bit different. I also don't envy them that if I was them, I wouldn't put something like a Ford announcement in the same vein or in the same event as a launch event or a car livery or a car launch. I just think it was something different. And again, hats off to Max Verstappen, who did an incredible job. Keep bringing up the fact that, oh no, we're still driving with a Honda engine and we won 2 championships with a Honda engine. And I'm still excited to see what we can do with Honda, even though he was standing on stage next to Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford. And I was like, how are we putting this man in this position? This is like an awkward position for this guy to be in. But I think he excelled in that moment. And it was really fun to see Max Verstappen excel in that moment. But I did have in that instance of like, this is too much. This is a Ford joining in 2026 announcement, and then it's also trying to hype us up about next year, and yet in front of us we don't look like we've got the car for next year, and you're also trying to do a bunch of other things. I know a lot of people didn't like it. I absolutely loved having the other athletes there and having that, but they should have been integrated into it a little bit more. They maybe should have been vetted. I don't know. There's a whole, but I really enjoyed hearing other athletes give praise to our Formula One athletes, because I don't think we hear that too often, especially from one athlete to another. The other ingredient, so I think there's managing expectations, figuring out that everyone is catered for. If you're going to have fans, if you're going to live stream it, make sure that you understand from the fan perspective what they want, from the media perspective what they want, from the partners perspective what they want. The other thing that I think was really interesting, I loved seeing Ariana host the McLaren launch, and I can't remember who. Do you remember who the name of her co-host was?
I don't, I'm afraid. It's a terrible memory on that one. But
one day I'll need to remember it. But what I thought was interesting is you had Ariana, who is a Formula One expert who knows what she is talking with. And then you had someone else who has like this bigger, broader cultural background, who was less of an F1 expert. And I think there was a really good banter there between having someone who knows the sport really well and someone who maybe doesn't. And I think that's maybe where Alpine, I think, fell a little bit short, is they had this incredible commentator, Vic, and she was very open about how she's a brand new Formula One fan and she's excited, but she didn't know the sport.
Oh, was it Vic Star?
Pardon?
Vic Stahl, the one of the sidemen. That's who it was. Yes. And
I think for her, what a hard task to be tasked with interviewing CEO of Alpine, team principal, chief technical officer, if you don't know the ins and outs of the sport. And where it fell a little bit flat is once in a while she'd ask a question, and as you do, you ask the question and some, and then she would ask the second question. You could see the guy looking at her going, I just answered that question. Oh, okay. And then there'll be a bit of an awkward moment and he'd be like, okay, I guess I'll answer again. But she had no way of knowing that he'd already answered it, because if you don't know the sport, you just don't know what you're supposed to know. And so that was my other big lesson, is I have no issues. Like, truly, I actually really appreciate it, bringing someone who is outside from the sport. But I think you always need to have someone who understands the sport as well, and have like that good duo combination. So that's the third thing. And then I think at the end of the day, look, the fans want to see a car, and the fans want to hear about why the car's going to be different and why it's going to beat everyone else and why it's going to be fast. And I did think that the Alpine team did that incredibly well. They had a whole, what was it, 15, 20 minutes about the technicality of the car, which was great. I'm sure that went above a lot of people's head, but that was what a lot of people were there to hear about and listen about. And at the end of the day, as we've been talking, it's about the research and development and the technology of this car and all of these cars and where it's going. So I think it's going to be very interesting. But I don't know, Adam, did you have the same feeling that I had, which was this was the first year that I felt like there was so much conversation and discussion around the car launch. And I think it's because a lot of the teams tried something new and different and integrated new pieces that we hadn't seen before. And some tried, got a little bit more innovative than others. But I had this moment of, wow, I don't think I've had that much discourse and that much conversation about car launches. We obviously always have the conversation about the Red Bull, of like, it's a shot car, it's the same livery. But the actual format of car launches, this for me was the first year that I was experiencing that amount of back and forth about it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, firstly, to try and be as concise as I can with this, we had a long winter break, the longest we've had in a while. And that was in part because of the FIFA World Cup. So they obviously didn't want that to clash with the Formula One finale. On top of all of that, I think because the Red Bull launch came quite early, and it was the first proper launch. I mean, we had Haas basically unveil their livery. Although they were up front, it was just going to be a livery render. Weren't going to show you a new car.
At least they were honest, managed expectations incredibly well.
And Red Bull, obviously, there was a lot of marketing that marketability you could associate with this. This was part of the Ford launch. It was meant to be quite secretive until it got leaked a few days beforehand. That coincided with the launch of the RB19 and obviously the controversy that followed because we didn't see a new car, much to the annoyance of a lot of F1 fans that wanted to just see the car. And it was like an hour-long... it was an hour launch on the stream.
Drawn out process.
Exactly. We were like, we just want to see the car. And then when we saw it, I think a lot of us knew we weren't going to see it, but it's still a little bit frustrating for some. And then, of course, we had other teams do their own launches. We saw Ferrari give an unveiling of their own car and a demonstration of Fiorano, which I think everybody loved purely because we got to see a car on track because it had been so long. So I think because it was such a mix. And of course, we had the Mercedes one as well, Aston Martin, the fan event that you mentioned.
Mercedes was slick.
Yeah, it was.
I was like, that cost a pretty penny.
Naomi and Natalie did a phenomenal job with that. It was really well done also. But as you said, I think because of the contrast of so many different launches, so many different aspects, I don't remember seeing many teams have a fan event like what Aston Martin did or Alpine. So I think there were so many different things. And even AlphaTauri, their launch lasted about 40 seconds on a stream. It was like, here's the car, here are the drivers, see you in testing. And it was like, okay, was that it? But I think that's probably why, Tony, just because we saw so many different aspects. And
every end of the spectrum we got, didn't we?
Pretty much. But it was great. I really enjoyed it. Some more than others. But of course, it just whets the appetite for the season ahead. And now we're in testing. I think we can just sit back, enjoy it, and then hopefully it's going to be a great season ahead. I did want to move on, if I may, because I am mindful of time also, about one of your projects, Sunday Fangirls, something that you're very passionate about, something that obviously I, when I looked into it, obviously found it very, very interesting. And I think it raised a more important topic at play, which kind of ties into the F1 Academy and in extension to what that is obviously going to represent going forward. But one thing I learned and one thing I did want to get your insight on is the fact that even today, in the modern world where we're trying to be as progressive as we can and trying to make strides going forward, some argue that perhaps we're not doing enough. Perhaps some people saying we're doing too much or forcing it on people. But the concept of women being valued equally to their male counterparts in the sport, a sport that has traditionally been involved with white men, and that view that these are the only people that could do the sport, it's for no one else, or women that get involved in the sport are just interested in the drivers because they're hot, they're not actually interested in the sport. What I find very strange is women seem to still looked at unfavorably, even comment sections of content, your content or other women creators, always the same stuff. Oh, do you even know how to drive a car? Or do you know, I mean, I'm just kind of spitballing here. You could probably tell me a plethora of different negative comments that you might get or other creators might get. But I find that strange because what I researched and what I read up on is that women seem to be, not that I have the data to back this up, I'm basically, speculating on this, they seem to be the biggest consumers of motorsport, whether that be content, merchandise, buying tickets, subscribing to their favorite drivers or personnel or anyone you can think of. For that reason, why do you think women are still looked at unfavorably or underrepresented in a sport that seems to be booming with so many new content creators or journalists or broadcasters or presenters like yourself, when really it should be something that be championed or celebrated?
You hit the nail on the head there again. And there's two big things. One, there's society's sexist double standard that's just always been there, and it's there across more or less every industry. We saw it with, I started doing some research 2 years ago about fangirls in the music space as well, and there's been extensive research and books written about this, where, you know, male fans of, you know, they're following an art and a craft, and they have deep knowledge and understanding of this industry, whereas women are driven by craze and lust, and, you know, they're silly little girls like that has very much spilled over into sports, and we're seeing that happening in sports, and we're seeing that happening in motorsports. And, you know, let's not forget the likes of the Beatles were told point blank, if you want to be taken seriously and you want to be real artists in this industry, you're going to have to find yourself a different fan base, because these screaming girls ain't it. Well, we all know how the Beatles ended up, and they did pretty good for themselves, and you're seeing the same with Harry Styles. So I often joke, who's going to be the Harry Styles of Formula One? But the thing that people seem to forget is that female fans, especially young girls, wield incredible power, both economically and in terms of relevancy. Relevancy for the teams, the athletes, and the sports that, you know, they champion. As you said, they buy your merchandise, they buy tickets to your events, they generate endless word of mouth, they organize online, offline, they take up space, they make up noise, they will do all of that. They also, which is one of the things that I absolutely fell in love with, is they push the industry to have the conversations that, quite frankly, we should have been having years ago. If you look at who's pushing the discourse about sexism, racism, LGBTQ rights, racial justice, sustainability, it's generally young women pushing for these conversations. And here's what we must keep reminding ourselves of: why the negative comments happen is because this sport, specifically Formula One, has been catering to a very specific demographic, generally middle-aged, white man, middle class. And for those 70 years, that audience segment, that consumer base, has been so used to everything being catered to them, which is why I think you get a lot of angry people today who going, what the fuck is this content? This is not for me. Why would I care about this? And because it's like, honey, not everything is created with you in mind. But I think that's a massive change for a lot of these men who were so used to going into a sport like Formula One and have everything catered to them, being spoken to in a way and in a language that they want to speak, be spoken to, approached in a certain way. The merch is the merch that they would want to buy. And I think there's, you know, and I do say this with a little bit of empathy, of all of a sudden, this is, again, what content creators have done, because we all have access to a phone and we can all call ourselves a content creator and we can all create content, which means that the diversity of people and the diverse pool of people creating content is incredible right now, which means that a lot of young women, especially women of color, especially Black women, create content out of necessity. They're like, I'm not seeing something that I would want to consume. So if I'm not seeing that, it means that people who look like me and think like me and maybe have the same background of me are probably thinking the same thing. So I'm going to put out content. There's this misunderstanding that women don't know what they're talking about. They're doing these fun TikTok dances with drivers, or they're asking these idiotic questions like this or that. And what I think people are misunderstanding here is this young fan base are also deep experts in this space. They just come at it differently. They ask different questions. Their knowledge is unique. The language they use might be different, but it doesn't mean that they don't understand this industry or they don't have deep knowledge of it. It just means that they're coming at it differently. And I think that's the thing that people are trying to wrap their heads around. And I always try and come at things with some amount of empathy. It's very hard to come at things with empathy when you get hate comments and hate mail and just people have no desire to see you. And I very much protected myself when I started creating content on TikTok. I definitely did very factual content with no emotion and no opinions. And I thought, no one's going to argue with factual content. And if they do, it's not that you disagree with my content. It's just you don't like the delivery and you don't like that it's coming from a young woman. And I can't change that. Like, I am not here to convince you that women are smart. And so that was my whole thing with Sunday Fangirls, is realizing, wow, there's something that we're missing here. And I got very angry, and I'm doing a second version actually of my ode to the Sunday Fangirls, because I got very angry and realizing, wait a minute, I spent most of 2022 watching as teams and drivers replicated content that was first created and put out by young women, that was then celebrated by these fans who first ridiculed the women who did first traps. And now all of a sudden Ferrari, all they can seem to do is do first traps of Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. And people don't seem to have an issue with it. But when it was young women that did it a year or two ago, it was like, how dare you, like yada, yada, you name every, anger in the book. Then I watched as drivers people like Alonso really wanting to crave the relevancy of the Gen Z audience segment, but couldn't quite muster the courage to actually respect the fan base, which I thought was really interesting. There's that incredible interview with Alonso. He's like, people, these new young fans don't remember the Alonso of 2016. Like, how could they? They have no knowledge. But at the same time, he's vying for their relevancy. He wants to be known as the Alonso of 2016. So I'm going, something has to change there. And then in 2022, I also watched endlessly as team principals and Formula One tapped themselves on the back and congratulated themselves for this rise of this new young female fan base, but also couldn't quite name them. And I was like, they're fangirls. That's what they are. And again, I know I definitely was one of those people who had a negative connotation to the word fangirl. And that's why I created Sunday Fangirl. I wanted it to be a cultural platform to have and kickstart hard conversations. And the first hard conversation for me was, where did that negative connotation of fangirls come from and how do we change that? And so started with some merch and some fun caps. And it was truly a moment seeing young women wearing the Sunday Fangirls cap in the paddock or around general admissions at a GP, and seeing them get drivers sign the cap. And that was such an incredible moment, watching drivers go, what's a Sunday fangirl? Talk to me. Wait. Or watching drivers like roll their eyes at the word fangirl, or just seeing women beeline to each other because they were carrying Sunday Fangirl merch and going, oh my God, we should be friends. You're one of us. And it was just like, for some people, it was like a bat signal of, good, well-intended people who actually truly just want to be there and have a little bit of fun and respect everyone else in the way that they want to consume a sport. Because at the end of the day, there isn't a right way to consume sport. As long as you're respectful to everyone else, consume it in whatever way you want. If it's through fun memes and jokes, TikTok dances, deep research papers, long podcasts, conversational podcasts like the one we're doing right now, like whatever makes you happy. So that was somewhat of the background and the desire with Sunday Fangirls and everything that you spoke about previously and everything we're seeing in this industry.
Well, it was really well said. And I read a great article about your take on Sunday Fangirls from Kindred Magazine. I definitely implore people to check that out. I think it's on your link tree as well. So if people want to check that out, I'll leave the link in the description, the show notes for our followers if they want to learn more.
Just one shout out on there. The woman who interviewed me has now been hired to do comms on one of the teams.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. And so this is what I think people are missing, is the teams that are actually taking note are going to win and win big. And that the industry is changing in that what's great here is now you have a young woman in a team doing communications. She's going to approach it differently. The comms that she's going to put out in the world, the partnerships that she's going to do, she's going to come it from the only way that she knows how to, which is by being a young woman. And so that's exciting for me. But yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Kindred because she's now joined one of the Formula One teams on the grid.
It was a great article and it really helped me learn a lot about that project. So it was really nice to sort of read that. I definitely recommend people to check that out when they can. I did want to talk about the growing controversy regarding politics in F1, but I think owing to time, I might park that for a future episode with you, if I may.
Sounds good. Of course, it's a meaty one, that one.
It is. I think it deserves its own one.
I feel like you and I could probably, have a good hour debate on that.
Yeah, and I'd look forward to that. But I do want to move on to the F1 Academy. Of course, being mindful of time. Obviously, we heard that the calendar has been put forward for this season. 15 drivers signing up for 5 big junior teams. Obviously, this is a gateway, hopefully, to move women and propel women into the upper junior formula categories. Obviously, if you haven't seen the pyramid, it's going to work out with the F1 Academy. Obviously, the best drivers from that move into Formula 3 and then Formula 2 and hopefully one day Formula 1. We haven't had a female Formula 1 driver since Leila Lombardi in 1976. So we haven't. No, so it has been a while, well overdue. With the F1 Academy, there's been a lot of talk regarding whether or not this step is significant enough to help women not only get the exposure they need to prove their skills, but also the financial backing, because the W Series was something that hoped to achieve that. From an independent observer, I didn't feel like it was able to do enough, because we had Jamie Chadwick, who dominated the sport for a couple of years, dominated that series. She's now just gone on to IndyCar NXT, and hopefully she does a great job there. But I don't know if it was given a fair chance to really achieve what it set out to. Now that F1 Academy has been, built, I suppose, from the foundations W Series left behind, then if it continues, then hopefully that is the case. Is F1 and the FIA doing enough with the F1 Academy, or do you feel there's more that needs to be done from a branding perspective? Because, these young women trying to get in the sport, you'd think prospective companies that want to improve their image or their marketability would get behind that, especially when I think these drivers are asking for as much as 130k, which is a lot of money, but nowhere near as much as you'd need to get into Formula 3 or Formula 2.
To answer your actual question about is Formula One and the FIA doing enough? No, but I also think that they're trying to play catch up, which fair enough, and they're doing their best to play catch up. I would say the thing that I want to see from the FIA and Formula One, which is a hard one in this day and age to do, but it's trial and error. Try it all, see what works. We haven't done this before, so we don't know what it looks like. I think there's a lot of good that came out of W Series, the main one being it shined a light on all of these incredible drivers. It failed on a bunch of other accounts. I was very dubious about it. The execution fell flat for me. But the thing that it did do was start and kickstart the conversation about these 18 drivers and shine a light on it. I think it also shined a light on, wait, we've got this driver with Jamie Chadwick who's now won 3 times in a row and still can't seem to be getting ahead, which I think looks poorly on both the FIA and Formula One. The fact that she's now gone across the Atlantic to America in Indy NXT. I think that if people are not worried or scratching their head inside of the FIA and Formula One right now, I really hope they are, because if your best talent from a female perspective is buggering off across the Atlantic, you've got an issue. If you can't retain that talent. I am excited with the F1 Academy. I was worried initially because it felt like it was a very knee-jerk reaction. We heard that, W Series wasn't going to finish their season, and then Formula One Academy came and said, we're going to do something. And I was very worried that this felt like a bit too sudden. But to your point, the fact that they're joining 5 already established teams, the fact that it's run by Bruno, who's, runs Formula 2, Formula 3, and he knows what he's doing and he's an incredible team around him, gives me a lot of hope. But again, let's just try it. Let's see if this works. But, and I don't think it's just Formula One and the FIA. What my biggest disappointment with the W Series when they announced that they wouldn't be able to finish their season was how little coverage this got. And the only coverage it got from Formula One or Motorsports journalists and pundits was essentially a copy paste of the press release. No opinions, no one was angry. And the only 2 articles that I saw where people were generally having a conversation about it were 2 female journalists. And this is where I was like, this pisses me off. When we keep saying, why would we care? Like, people do care about their sports. The fans are tuning in and want to tune in, and there's a whole conversation we could have about broadcasting and how do we find, and what does the coverage look like for all of this. But I do think the journalists also need to step up and actually cover this sport and actually do it in a way that's exciting, the same way. I mean, and I know it's not the same, but if Formula 3 or Formula 4, Formula 1 stopped mid-season because of lack of funding, you best bet that people would be writing about it. And I don't think it got the deserved coverage that it should have. And that was just one example of, we've got a fair amount of work still to be done here.
Yeah.
But where my head is at is, let's just try it all, because to your point, it's been a long time. It's been nearly 50 years that we've been waiting for a woman in this space. And they're everywhere. The women are here. So I'm sick and tired of hearing there aren't enough women in this sport. They are if you care to look, and if you do the research and you start looking, the women are here and they're everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whether one woman in particular turns out to be good enough to make it in a Formula 1, we'll have to wait and see. But if they can't even be allowed to make that next step, as Jamie Chadwick wasn't allowed to, then, what are we doing here almost? It's almost like a tick box exercise. And I hate using that phrase, but I absolutely agree with you. That's what it was almost. And it needs to be more than that. As I said, be mindful of timing. I'm going to ask you one thing about F1 2023. In your ideal world, how does F1 2023 shape up? What are you in particular hoping for this season coming?
I'm hoping, I think like everyone, I'm hoping to see some incredible battles at the top between the top 3 and some really close battles. I'm hoping we have a couple of surprises in the midfield. I'm always mostly interested in the midfield, and there's a reason why everyone says that the midfield is where the interesting thing happens. I'm curious. There's a couple of things. I'm curious about Alfa Romeo and their end of partnership with Sauber and the Sauber evolution. And I think we're going to start seeing little moments of that evolution this year. I'm honestly excited to see the evolution of the Red Bull and can Max get it three in a row? And I'm excited to see Mercedes, see if they can do a comeback. I'm not the biggest Ferrari fan for no reason whatsoever. I just always seem to forget Ferrari, which is kind of insane. And I'm sorry, Adam.
It was going so well. Just when I was beginning to love you, Toni, but But
he's like, and we're out,
and
it just goes dead.
Might edit that out.
This is the beauty of it. We need die-hard Ferrari fans like yourself, because there are people like me who keep seem to forgetting about Ferrari. There's a lot. I'm actually also excited by the what is it, the 3-4 rookies that we have this year. I don't envy all of them. I think someone like Oscar has some big shoes to fill. I think I'm a broken record, but every season there's really cool stuff to look forward to. And truthfully, and I say this with like devil's eyes, I am excited for the year where we don't talk about politics in F1, because I think that backfired. And I know we're not going to talk about that, but I think this is going to be the most political year that we've had, with the most amount of conversations around politics in sports and in Formula One.
I agree.
I cannot wait for that.
I absolutely agree with that one, and I'm grateful for content creators like yourself that can help sort of break it all down in a nice 30 to 40 second segment and
thanks, Adam.
Cheer us up on a Monday morning thinking, oh, the world is great. No, it's not.
No, it's not.
And this is why.
Keep that thought.
But no, obviously, Toni, I've loved having you on the show. I really appreciate you giving up your time. We'd love to have you back, of course, for a future episode where we can talk about all the fun stuff and a bit more about the cars as well as the season progresses on. But for the benefit of our audience, and as tempted as it is to just put your Linktree link and just say to our followers, have a go at all of that, there's a lot there. Where can our wonderful followers and listeners find your content on social media? Where can they find Toni Cowan-Brown?
Your incredible followers can find me at F1 Toni on TikTok and everywhere else at Toni Cowan-Brown. That's Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, you name it.
Brilliant stuff. Yep, absolutely brilliant. And of course, we'll put that all in the show notes for our followers. And as always, guys, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and give us a nice 5-star review. I think on this episode, I think we deserve that just for the great insight that we've had from Toni alone. But until next time, guys, we'll be back with the review of F1 testing in the build-up to the new season. But until then, stay safe. Thanks for tuning in, as always. And we'll see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. And remember, as always, if you're not first, you're probably DNF1. Take care.